President Yoon Suk-yeol wraps up his three-day stay in Spain and is headed home after attending the NATO summit this week. He held a number of bilateral and multilateral meetings on the sidelines of his first overseas trip as president. Today, Hong Kong marks the 25th anniversary of the city's return to Chinese sovereignty from the United Kingdom. For the event, Chinese President Xi Jinping headed to Hong Kong, his first trip outside mainland China since the start of COVID-19. The rain that fell most of Thursday has subsided Friday morning, as the seasonal rain front has now moved further north. With a pause in rain, summer heat waves are now on the way for the weekend.
Hello and welcome to New Day at Arirang. It's Friday, July 1st, 8 a.m. here in Seoul, South Korea. I'm Lee Seung-jae.
And I'm Yoon. Thanks for joining us this morning, because over the next hour, we'll be giving you a look at some of the biggest headlines of the day and experts' insights on issues facing Korea and the rest of the world. Wrapping up his trip to Spain, President Yoon Suk-yeol held a series of bilateral meetings with leaders from the Czech Republic, Canada, and the UK.
That's right, and discussions include cooperation on North Korean economic security. Yoon Jung-min starts us off.
South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol wrapped up his Spain trip on Thursday for this week's NATO summit with a series of sideline meetings, bolstering cooperation with partner countries for exports and North Korea's denuclearization. Meeting Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, President Yoon thanked Canada for its participation in the Korean War over 7 decades ago and mentioned a newly established monument in Canada to mark victory at the Battle of Gapyeong.
또 양국의 이런 우호를 바탕으로 해서 앞으로도 이런 첨단 기술, 인공지능, 에너지 이런 첨단 미래 산업으로 또 경제 안보 협력을 양국이 강화해 나갈 수 있을 것으로 생각합니다.
Canada is deeply engaged in the North Pacific and in the Indo-Pacific on a broad range of issues, and Korea is a very important partner to us.
The two leaders reaffirmed coordination for the denuclearization of North Korea, which Trudeau called a complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization. There also was a pull-aside meeting with the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, during which a bilateral framework for closer cooperation was adopted to strengthen cooperation in politics, economy, and culture. While bolstering cooperation on nuclear energy, the two leaders agreed to coordinate on digital trade and supply chain issues through more negotiation of their bilateral free trade agreement. Yoon also asked for support from the UK, a UN permanent member, on North Korea's nuclear issues. And during a meeting with the Prime Minister of the Czech Republic, Petr Fiala, President Yoon asked for support so that Korean companies can make inroads into a Dukovany nuclear power plant project in that country, as well as support for Korea's bid to host 2030 World Expo in Busan. The Czech leader expressed hope over expanding cooperation with Korea on electric car batteries and hydrogen. Yoon also sat down with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, during which they shared a wish for stronger partnership between Korea and NATO, especially as South Korea newly sets up a diplomatic mission in Brussels. Also agreed was coordination against North Korea's nuclear programs. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
And President Yoon's diplomacy continued with local business leaders in Spain. He met with the country's economic officials and local CEOs on Thursday to talk about economic cooperation between the two countries. Our Kim Hyun-sung fills us in.
En la unión está la fuerza. That's a Spanish proverb, meaning in union, there's strength. And building strength by working together is what South Korea and Spain had set out to do when President Yoon Suk-yeol met with Spain's economic leaders in Madrid on Thursday. Present at the meeting were the president of the Spanish Chamber of Commerce, along with local CEOs.
여기 계신 스페인 경제인 여러분, 이미 한국 지역과 협력하고 있거나 또는 협력 의향을 갖고 계신 것으로 알고 있습니다.
President Yoon was accompanied by South Korea's top diplomatic and economic officials. Over lunch, figures from both countries discussed how to boost trade and mutual investments. Spain is currently the fourth biggest economy in the European Union. It also has a strong foothold in some of the world's most prominent industries. South Korea and Spain are already engaged in a lively level of trade. For the first quarter of this year, more than $1.5 billion worth of trade went back and forth between them, making Spain South Korea's seventh largest trader from the EU. And for 2021, the two countries increased both exports and imports by almost 25% compared to the year before. But more can happen. Spain has recently been showing interest in expanding the green energy sector and 5G networks. These are some objectives that South Korea and its companies share.
경제인들이야말로 양국 협력의 최일선에 계시는 분들입니다. 오늘 이 자리가 양국 간의 경제 협력을 더욱 강화하는 그런 소중한 자리가 되었으면 좋겠습니다.
President Yoon said on Thursday that to tackle global risks, cooperation is crucial. He also said that he's all ears to any difficulties that may arise in the process of working together. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
So the South Korean leader's first overseas trip and his debut on the diplomatic stage has ended quite successfully. President Yoon showed South Korea's will for global solidarity and cooperation. Looking back on the diplomatic significance of his trip to NATO, our editor-in-chief Moon Kanya reports from Madrid.
South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol wraps up his three-day stay in Madrid, during which he attended a 30-membered military alliance summit, the first for a South Korean head of state. Here, the president, now less than 2 months in office, warned the NATO members of the threat to universal values at a time of new conflict and competition, a reference to Russia's aggression in Ukraine and China's engagement with Russia.
특정 국가를 거명하기보다 이런 자유와 인권, 법치를 중시하는 그런 규범에 입각한 질서가 존중되는 그런 협력을 우리 나토 국가들과 인태 국가들이 함께 연대해서 만들어 가야 된다.
South Korea's approach to NATO comes as the alliance is looking towards the Indo-Pacific, a new focus that Yoon's aides say the president welcomes. In its new strategic concept unveiled Wednesday, NATO, for the first time, described China as a challenge to its interests, security, and values, as an economic and military power that remains opaque about strategy, intentions, and military buildup. Beijing's envoy in Seoul fumed over the Western alliance's labeling of China as systemic challenge.
One of the goals we came to achieve at NATO this time is to establish a solidarity of values and norms. As the security situation of one region can spill over to the rest of the world, there is a clear need for countries around the globe to cooperate to together resolve an issue.
Experts agree that this reflects the Yoon administration's awareness of how the current security challenges the world is facing go far beyond the immediate challenges of North Korea, as we continue to see a concerted attempt to undermine democratic values globally. As South Korea is well placed to reaffirm the importance of the liberal democratic values and successes of its democratic governments, President Yoon's presence at NATO is both a symbolic and practical reaffirmation of the confirmation to those values. 16 diplomatic engagements, big and small, over the course of 3 days. No immediate feat, if you ask, but
At the end of the day, I believe we've taken the right step forward in smoothly carrying out summit diplomacy for the next 5 years.
But this is just the beginning for President Yoon. Like his security advisor said, perhaps his decision to make the NATO summit his very first foreign trip perhaps reflects the situation South Korea and President Yoon stand in geopolitics, that a gray zone is no longer allowed. President Yoon will have to balance his relations with U.S. and China while dealing with a belligerent North Korea developing nuclear arms and missiles while improving ties with Japan. 문건영, Arirang News, Madrid.
Now, July 1st celebrates the 25th anniversary of the British return of Hong Kong to Chinese rule. And to celebrate the anniversary, Chinese President Xi Jinping headed to Hong Kong, making his first trip outside the mainland since the pandemic began. Kim Yo-sun has more.
President Xi Jinping arrived in Hong Kong Thursday, a day before the official ceremony celebrating the 25th anniversary of the British handover of the island. After arriving by train, Xi explained how Hong Kong has overcome numerous challenges over the years.
In the past few years, Hong Kong has withstood severe tests again and again, overcoming risks and challenges one by one. After the wind and rain, Hong Kong has risen from the ashes and also demonstrated a high level of vigor and vitality.
He also stressed that the one country, two systems will bring a brighter future to Hong Kong. Under Xi's leadership, Beijing has reshaped Hong Kong during the past 2 years, cracking down on protests and freedom of speech. A more patriotic curriculum has been introduced at schools. Marking the occasion, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson accused Beijing of failing to keep its promises.
But on the 25th anniversary of the handover, we simply cannot avoid the fact that for some time now, Beijing has been failing to comply with its obligations. It's a state of affairs that threatens both the rights and freedoms of Hong Kongers and the continued progress and prosperity of their home.
In a video message posted on Twitter, he stressed that his country was not going to give up on Hong Kong. The anniversary marks the halfway point of the 50-year governance model agreed upon between London and Beijing. But the UK has become increasingly critical of Chinese rule there, especially following Beijing's implementation of a harsh national security law in 2020. Washington also criticized China's Hong Kong policies. The spokesperson of the U.S. National Security Council said in a statement Thursday that the world is witnessing a dismantling of Hong Kong's democratic institutions as well as unprecedented pressures on many areas. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
Now, the U.S. stock market has reportedly witnessed the worst first half of a year since 1970. The New York Times reported Thursday that the S&P 500 peaked earlier this year and has dropped nearly 20% over the past 6 months. It added that bonds, which are particularly sensitive to economic conditions, also had a terrible 6 months. Meanwhile, Bitcoin on Thursday had lost around 58% of its value in the second quarter of this year alone. This is the worst quarterly loss for the world's largest cryptocurrency since Q3 of 2011. Ketanji Brown Jackson has become the first black woman to be appointed to the United States highest court. The 51-year-old Harvard graduate will replace Associate Justice Stephen Breyer on the Supreme Court. The 116th justice will become the 6th woman and 3rd black person to serve on the Supreme Court since 1789 when it was founded. She will join the liberal bloc of the court with a 6-3 conservative majority. Her swearing-in comes just 6 days after the 1973 Roe v. Wade landmark that legalized abortion nationwide was overturned. And now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into some of the key issues in the spotlight right now. The 2-day NATO summit over in Madrid came to an end on Thursday, with South Korean President Yoon there in an observational role. Now there he made a speech, the first time a South Korean leader spoke at a NATO summit.
But it was much more than a simple participation for President Yoon. He was able to carry out the so-called sales diplomacy with some of the countries taking part. For a look at how things went at the summit, we connect with Kim Young-jun, professor at National Security College at the Korea National Defense University. Good morning to you, Professor.
Thank you for having me.
All right, first off, let's talk about South Korea's sales diplomacy. I mean, how significant was this so-called sales diplomacy, and what were some of the notable accomplishments?
Yeah, sales diplomacy is not a new word to the ROC foreign policy from the former President Moon Jae-in and to the current President Yoon Suk-yeol will do sales diplomacy, especially during the NATO summit. Yoon administration focused on the two, especially our K industry, including nuclear power plant export and K defense industry. So with the Czech Republic, Yoon administration tried to sell our nuclear power plant after UAE, and to the Poland and the Yoon administration focused on the K defense industry, including K9, and also with the Spain we do a great job. So for this kind of the sales diplomacy will be main foreign policy direction of the Yoon administration for the future.
So, Professor Kim, at the NATO summit, President Yoon did push for the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. But considering the summit did mainly focus on Russia and its invasion of Ukraine, not to mention China being mentioned there as well, do you think Yoon's speech was enough to kind of garner sufficient interest from the participating countries to help achieve denuclearization?
Yeah, our position between the U.S. and China is very unique and different from the European countries. So President Yoon's speech enough to have a very important message to NATO country, but at the same time he do not use the word of China. So it will be it was a very good way to deliver our message without making troubling. And he also focused on the liberal democracy, institutional world order, and also the denuclearization, and the ask to North Korea to join denuclearization negotiation talks again. So his message is powerful and enough to deliver our message to the European country as a middle power in the Pacific area.
Now, one of the main focuses of the NATO summit was pushing back against Russia. So how do you think Russia will respond to international solidarity seen at the summit?
Yeah, NATO warned Russia, not surprising, and also used the word of China as a systemic challenge to liberal institutional order. So, but as you know, Russia will do not any reaction to the directly to the NATO message because it is not new, and do not care about NATO because Russia already knew NATO will not send their own ground forces to the Ukraine territory. Also, Russia strongly wants any deployment of NATO military equipment to Sweden and Finland, the new NATO member. If it is, Russia will do a strong reaction, including the use of the nuclear weapons for any kind of NATO strong behavior. But in this time, the NATO message is still language rather than action. So NATO message will not lead immediately reaction from Russia.
Not to mention, along with South Korea, you had three other Asia-Pacific nations invited to the summit, right? You had Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. But I know President Yoon didn't directly mention China during his speech, but still, I mean, how do you think China will respond to South Korea's participation there? And do you think it'll ultimately affect the Seoul-Beijing ties moving forward?
Yes, you're right. China already one kind of South Korean to join NATO conference because it's the first time for the Republic of Korea president to join NATO presidential conference. It's a very symbolic and very powerful message. So China did a very strong message about it, but China will not do an immediate reaction for the South Korea to join the NATO conference, including the revenge of economic trade or something like that. But anyway, in a larger picture, China understands the direction of Yoon administration foreign policy direction, including cooperation with the NATO and the Quad in the Pacific area. So China will do a step-by-step approach to press South Korea with their economic power and trading power. So that's why President Yoon emphasized on we need to reduce dependency on China for a while. So China will not do immediate reaction, but anyway, China will do step-by-step approach to press Asian country for their own action to join NATO conference.
All right, thank you so much for your insights, Professor. Looking forward to speaking to you again.
Thank you very much.
And with that, that's going to wrap up the first half of New Day at Arirang.
But coming up next, we take a look at the classical music scene here in South Korea, especially with pianist Im Yoon-chan recently winning the 16th Van Cliburn competition. That's all coming up, so stay tuned.
Share South Korea's experience in tackling COVID-19 and introduce a Korean New Year. A Korean survivor of Japan's wartime sex slavery met with
extraordinary climate crisis and pledged to work with the EU to tackle the challenge.
The objective of its North Korea policy is
protesters gathering across the country to peacefully demand an end to hate and violence.
Arirang, what matters?
I feel so good right now. Maybe I had a drink or two, but this somehow feels like it's forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Maybe this is forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Forever.
And welcome back to the second half of New Day at Arirang. The rain that fell most of Thursday has subsided this morning as the seasonal rain front has now moved further north.
But weather forecasts say starting late this afternoon, the central region of South Korea will see rain showers accompanied by lightning until this evening. Southern parts of Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon-do province, as well as inland Chungcheong-do and Gyeongsang-do, are expecting 5 to 40 millimeters of rain. However, the country is also bracing for summer heat waves as temperatures might reach as high as 35 degrees Celsius in Daegu today, with a heat wave warning already in effect. Now, heat waves are expected with a pause in rain. Expect those heat waves for the whole nation this weekend. Meanwhile, on Thursday, torrential downpours disrupted traffic in the nation's capital. In fact, for the first time in 2 years, Jamsu Bridge crossing the Han River in central Seoul has been closed off and is still closed off as of this morning. Our Yoon has more.
This year's monsoon is pounding the central part of South Korea. There's been numerous cases of flooding and landslides. As of 6 p.m. on Thursday, the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasure Headquarters said 2 people have died from the heavy rain. Over 80 properties have been flooded.
Heavy rainfall has raised water levels so high that Jamsu Bridge has completely closed off for the first time in 2 years. back over there, that's where pedestrians, bikers, and cars would used to go by. But now that water levels have surpassed 7 meters, it's impossible for anybody to pass. And right over there, there used to be chairs and tables for people to enjoy the Han River at, but you can't even see them now because it's completely underwater.
The last time Jamsu Bridge in Seoul was closed off was in the summer of 2020. Back then, water levels peaked at over 11 meters. Though water levels aren't as high as before, authorities are still on the lookout because the country is expecting to see even more rainfall until Friday morning. Up to 150 millimeters is set to pour down in the greater capital region. The capital region has already seen what 130 millimeters worth of rain overnight can do. On Thursday morning, there were reports of major traffic congestion. By 9 a.m., cars in Seoul were driving at an average speed of just 14.7 kilometers per hour. Large streams had overflown with water, closing off major roads like the Dongbu Expressway. That's why authorities encouraged people to use public transport. Seoul City has extended the number of buses and subway trains operating during rush hour for an extra 30 minutes. The Korea Meteorological Administration has said making an exact prediction as to when skies will clear up is difficult, as rain clouds are rapidly changing. What they've analyzed so far is that the central part of Korea will see heavy rain till Friday morning. 신예은, Arirang News.
A number of important economic policy changes are coming up. The Finance Ministry announced new rules on mortgage lending and a bigger tax cut on fuel, along with measures to support strategic high-tech industries. Our Lee Dae-yeon explains.
The government's announced a number of important measures for the second half of the year to help consumers and the economy. The Ministry of Finance said Thursday that to give some relief to drivers paying record-high fuel prices, it's likely to increase the tax cut on fuel to the legal limit of 37%. The tax cut right now is at 30%. This will bring down gasoline prices by around 4 US cents a liter and diesel by about 3 cents. The Financial Services Commission is going to expand its support for people who, because of the pandemic, are struggling to keep up with their loans while they're self-employed or running a small business. From October, many will be eligible for lower interest rates and principal payments. Also, to help more people get on the property ladder, the rules will be eased on borrowing. The government is going to raise the limit on loan-to-value for mortgages to 80% for first-time homebuyers. Right now, it's at 60 to 70%.
When the LTV ratio was 70%, it was still hard for first-time buyers to make a down payment of 30%. The new measure will help these people, but there are still other problems like high interest rates.
The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy will also take steps from August to protect and grow several high-tech strategic industries like semiconductors, batteries, and vaccines. These will include stabilizing supply chains for high-tech items and boosting government support for related companies. The ministry also aims to launch a task force to accelerate what it calls the industrial digital transformation. There is a new pilot project for the Ministry of Health and Welfare, too. From July, people in 6 designated cities and districts, including Jongno-gu District in Seoul, can apply for benefits when they're sick or injured and miss work. They'll get almost 44,000 won a day, or about $34 US. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, meanwhile, is going to use leftover stock to let people get the older green version of the Korean passport for a cheaper fee. And from July, national ID cards are going digital, so a smartphone version can be used with the same legal validity as a physical one. The app is called Government 24, and so far it's available for Android only, but an iOS version will be out soon. Lee Dae-yeon, Arirang News.
South Korea is becoming home to classical geniuses. Pianist Im Yoon-chan, violinist Yang In-mo, and cellist Choi Ha-young are just 3 of some 37 South Koreans that recently grabbed awards at international music competitions, according to the Kumho Cultural Foundation. Now, 18-year-old Im made headlines around the world last week as the youngest pianist to win the world-renowned Van Cliburn International Piano Competition. Violinist Yang In-mo, meanwhile, became the first South Korean to win the Sibelius Violin Competition, and cellist Choi Ha-young won the Queen Elizabeth Competition. Those in the classical circle are even calling it a Korean classical phenomenon, praising young Korean musicians who are making their names known on the global stage. For more on this, we are now joined by Professor Lee Gang-ho from Korea National University of Arts. Welcome, Professor.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right, so let's start off with you and your story. I mean, we know that you are a renowned cellist yourself. So tell us about what it was like to be a cellist in your time compared to now.
You make it sound as if
I'm sorry. Excuse me for that. I didn't mean to sound like that, but yes.
In my young
yes, in your younger days, yes.
I must say, in my youth as well, we had our idols like Hyung-hwa Chung and Yang Woo Kim and all these wonderful musicians who made us to be very proud to be Koreans, right? But I suppose the biggest difference is that although they are Koreans, they were educated mostly in the US or in Europe. They left probably in their middle school, high school years, and made their career there. In my case as well, I left Korea when I was in middle school. So my schooling was mostly in the United States.
Okay.
I suppose that is really the biggest difference. I suppose, looking back.
Right.
My younger days.
In your younger days. Well, I mean, then how has the industry for the atmosphere itself has changed, do you think, in your point of view, for the younger musicians, classical musicians now?
Sure. I think nowadays, one has a lot more opportunities, such as the internet and YouTube, etc. Even if they are studying in Korea, they are able to experience and witness what's going on worldwide. For example, Yoon Chan's performance at the Van Cliburn competition, I mean, it was going live on YouTube.
Yes.
I myself watched it, and now the YouTube view is what 3 or 4 million,
it's
right?
skyrocketed.
Views?
Yes, most definitely.
I suppose that is the biggest difference, because when I was young, in order to get a recording of a piece that I wanted to listen to, I had to talk to somebody who lived in the States or in Europe to get a copy. Whereas now, with the one click, you can actually hear sometimes even a live performance of it.
Right, and they have many more channels, I guess, to make themselves known.
Exactly. Yeah. Sure. There are many more platforms through which they can show what they're capable of.
Right. Well, like we mentioned earlier, pianist Im Yoon Chan won the 16th Van Cliburn piano competition as the youngest one to win that gold medal, right? I mean, first, tell us about this competition. I mean, how prestigious is this competition in the world of piano?
Sure. I mean, I myself is a cellist, but I can certainly tell you about Van Cliburn competition. It's one of the most prestigious and biggest competition in the world. Also, it was actually named after an American pianist. His name is Van Cliburn. And he was the first winner of the Tchaikovsky competition in Russia. And it's quite meaningful, especially for the Americans back then, because it was during the Cold War. And that an American can go to Moscow and winning this, I think, meant more than just winning a music competition. To honor that, I think 1958, to honor his triumph, I think Van Cliburn Foundation was formed, and they decided to establish a competition in honor of him. I think the first competition was in '62.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, and it's always in Texas.
Okay. All right. Well, were there any other Koreans who won this competition? Not like the gold medal, but other medals as well.
Actually, the previous winner, Sonu Yegon, is also Korean. But before that, I believe one of our graduates, Son Yeorum, won second or third. And going back further, I believe Hasan Paik, who also won, may have
Okay,
won
so
prize.
we do go way back with the Korean musicians winning that competition. Now, does winning of in this competition, what significance or the meaning does it carry, this win for South Koreans and classical music?
For me, actually, a person who's in this industry or in this field, rather than it being a great news, for me it's an affirmation of how well Korean musicians have been doing. For example, in the world of piano, we had people like Sunwoo Kim who won this competition more than a decade ago, and Ji Young Moon who won Busoni and Geneva. Even last year, Jae Hong Park who won the Busoni competition. These are all major competitions, and to have these winners, and especially now with Im Yoon Chan, with this electrifying performance, getting all this attention, I feel like it's the successful development of our classical education and performance is being, in a way, reaffirmed.
Well, this is on a different note, but because you're a cellist yourself, I mean, we talked about Choi Ha-young winning that Queen Elizabeth competition. Tell us more about that competition.
Sure, Queen Elizabeth competition also is a major competition, right? It's funded by the royal family of Belgium, and it used to be that only piano, violin, and voice were the competing categories. About the one that Ha-young won is actually the second time for the cello. Cello was added at a later time.
Way later.
And I think it's as a cellist, I think it's wonderful. She did not attend our university, but she used to attend our prep division, KNIGA, Korea National Institute for the Gifted in Arts, and left to England to study during her middle school years. So in a way, although she's not a graduate of ours, we are connected. I had a student of mine, Woo Chan-jung, who was also in the finals. There are actually quite a few Korean cellists in the finals as well. So I was very pleased and proud.
Yeah, you must have been very proud. I mean, going back to many of the musicians studying overseas, I think what stood out for Im Yoon Chan was that he was educated here, right here in Korea, and never studied overseas. I mean, and I think we know that you being at the professor of the same university that he is attending, Korea National University of Arts, what does this mean to you?
Of course, I'm very proud and pleased. But at the same time, the people that I mentioned, Sunwook and Yeorum and who else did I mention?
So many students.
Yeah, they actually won these major competitions while they are studying in Korea, and they're educated only in Korea. So, in a way, being able to succeed in the classical music world and being educated only in Korea, I don't think it's a big news for us anymore.
Right.
But at the same time, I think Yoon Chan, a lot of people were very impressed by not only his ability to be a wonderful pianist, but to understand the style and the interpretation of many different pieces from different time periods. I think that's what impressed a lot of the audiences and the jury members.
All right. And how did Im enroll in your school? I mean, was it a different process, early admissions or gifted program?
Sure. As I mentioned, we have a prep division, and it's in a way even more competitive to get into than our university because of the limited spots. And you can enroll, we can audition to be enrolled as early as 8 or 9.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's it's not a school. It's they only come maybe on weekends for the for the applied area lessons and theory and stuff like that. And there's another track for the university. This is for the prep division. For the university, we have a special opportunity for people who excel in this area to get into university even if they don't have a high school diploma.
Okay.
Meaning, as long as they have graduated from middle school, and if they are exceptionally good, that they can apply and be admitted to the university.
Wow.
And Yoon went through the prep division, and after he won the Isang-Yoon competition, he auditioned and was admitted 2 years ago.
Right.
And so if he were, I think, in high school, he would be probably a senior in high school.
Okay,
But he entered the college
Right.
that much earlier than others.
Wow, he is a gifted one.
Yes,
for
he
sure. Okay, so K-classics or Korean classical music obviously has been gaining popularity even before we have been talking about this, but obviously there are more people now calling it even like K-classics phenomenon, right? So how is your school's education system different from other musical schools here in South Korea or other musical academies?
I think having a very successful prep division helps because we are able to identify young talents and start them at a very early stage and make sure that they are taken care of and they're educated in the most, most efficient and proper way possible. Number two is maybe it's the ecosystem that the school and current Korean music world provides, because it takes more than just hard practice or one particular teacher and one particular student. One has to be able to play a lot of chamber music and interact with other musicians and grow. And I think the education system in Korea, I don't know if you know that or not, but the university was actually founded by the government. And 30 years ago, the government actually thought it's an area that they really wanted to promote and really foster as one of the areas that we can really excel in. I think so. Systematically, I think we are providing the best sort of a very fertile ground for the young artists to thrive.
Right, and you have those eyes to find them as well, I guess.
Sure.
All right, well, with all this good news, though, I'm sure there are some obstacles and hurdles that stand in the way for classic musicians. So tell us more about those.
Sure. In some ways, I think it's a classic example of the supply actually growing faster than the demand domestically, because there are so many wonderful musicians, and but after they have graduated and etc., what do? So several ways I think we need to overcome this. One is that, which is already happening, a lot of the Korean artists are finding their places overseas. They sometimes join top orchestras, or they settle in Europe or in America performing there. That's one way. Number two is, I think our society and audience must mature as we are also developing these top musicians. In France, they don't define middle class with the amount of income you earn, but they say middle class is someone who is able to speak a foreign language, able to play an instrument, is able to play a sport and really enjoy it, and is able to participate in community service. And it's in a way, culturally a much more mature way of looking at how one country ought to go. And in Korea, I think culturally, as we develop our taste for these things, in some ways, maybe that will increase the demand to meet the supply.
Hopefully.
And I think that actually may provide healthier and happier Korea.
Okay, well, where do you think this industry is headed then, if you are hoping for more demand, I mean, as an industry as a whole?
Sure, I think we are actually, I mean, as you said, the power of K classics, we are doing exceptionally well, and it's being acknowledged worldwide. I believe that we'll continue to be good, successful at this. But not only nowadays us going, well, how it used to be, going overseas to study, but now I think we are slowly attracting people to come to Korea to study.
Right. That sounds
and instead of following the standards of the West, that we are able to actually set new standards.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, that would be a road that we would like to see.
That's what we hope for.
All of us going, right?
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your insight today, Professor.
Thank you.
The Seoul Museum of History, which displays the capital's artifacts from the 14th century, has fully reopened its permanent exhibition hall. All 5 zones are now open after 2 years of renovation. The upgraded hall has more than 500 new relics and features a tunnel-shaped digital exhibition area that mimics how the city was in the early 20th century. It also hosts a variety of cultural programs, and events for families, and admissions is free of charge from Tuesday to Sunday. Now, Seoul is runner-up among some 1,000 cities in terms of hosting the most number of international nonprofit organizations last year. The ranking by the Union of International Associations pushed up the South Korean capital 1 slot. The city hosted 265 meetings in 2021, both online and in person, accounting for about 4% of all meetings held worldwide. The government attributed the higher ranking to its provision of disinfection services like air shower booths at meeting venues. Brussels was number 1 and Tokyo came in 3rd.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that the Environmental Protection Agency does not have the authority to require states to decarbonize their electricity sectors. The decision, made in a 6-3 vote on Thursday, is likely to hinder the U.S.'s ability to curb emissions and meet its target of limiting temperature increases to 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2030. This comes after West Virginia, along with 18 other mostly Republican states and a number of major coal companies, sued the Environmental Agency over an Obama-era regulation called the Clean Power Plan. The measure was meant to reduce greenhouse gases from coal-fired power plants, but it never took effect due to ongoing legal challenges. A judge in Florida has blocked the state from enforcing bans or restrictions on abortion. This follows the state's new law banning abortions after the 15th week of pregnancy, which was due to come into effect on July 1st. Florida is one of the many states looking to bring in new laws following the U.S. Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade a week earlier. However, a Tallahassee-based circuit court judge said on Thursday that the state's new law is unconstitutional. The judge made the decision following a petition from abortion rights groups meant to temporarily stop the ban. For now, abortion in Florida will remain legal until the 24th week of pregnancy. More petitions have been filed in other states by abortion rights groups to try and halt the so-called trigger laws, designed to come into effect when Roe v. Wade was overturned. The Philippines wakes up this morning to a new president as Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has officially been sworn in. The ceremony on Thursday restored one of the country's most notorious political dynasties 36 years after the ousting of Marcos Jr.'s father, the former dictator Ferdinand Marcos. Speaking during his inauguration, the new president praised the accomplishments of his father, promising to emulate him and fulfill his campaign pledges.
We will build back better by doing things in the light of the experiences that we have had, both good and bad. It doesn't matter. No looking back in anger or nostalgia.
His election victory from May 9th came as the result of a decades-long effort to alter public perceptions of the family. A casting of one of the world's most iconic sculptures in the world, August Rodin's The Thinker, has been sold for $11.1 million. Going under the hammer in Paris on Thursday, the piece of art met selling estimates from Christie's auction house, which predicted it would fetch between $9 to $14 million. It is one of roughly 40 authentic castings which were enlarged from the original 70-centimeter tall piece after it gained prominence. Originally made in 1880, The Thinker was initially called The Poet by the French sculptor and was meant to represent the Italian philosopher Dante. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good morning. Finally, the monsoon rain has let up as the monsoonal front moved further north. And since Wednesday, Seoul received a massive 214 millimeters of rainfall. And today, there could be some passing rain in the eastern parts of the country. And while the monsoon rain takes a short break, the heat sets in. Highs in Seoul will be about 8 degrees higher this afternoon, whereas southern parts of the country, which have been under heat alerts for a while, will see temperatures going as high as yesterday, with heat alerts to be expanded to more parts of the country. Well, lots of clouds to start the day in Seoul with a slight glimpse of sunshine, and it's much brighter in southern regions. Now, skies will get brighter across Korea with stronger UV rays, and Seoul will be going up to 31 degrees, Gyeongju topping out at 36 degrees Celsius this afternoon. And the first weekend of July looks like bringing tropical nights and intense afternoon heat to much of the country, so please plan accordingly for your weekend. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
And that wraps up our newscast for this hour, but we'll be back next week for our Monday's edition of New Day at Arirang.
Thanks for joining us this morning, and do stick around for more updates throughout the day. Have a great rest of their day wherever you are. Goodbye.